At the grand wedding of millionaire Ethan Crawford, every corner of the ballroom shined with gold and luxury. The guests wore their finest clothes, the chandeliers sparkled, and laughter filled the air. Ethan's mother, Margaret Crawford, stood proudly near the stage, greeting guests with her usual confidence. She was a woman known for her strong personality and love for status. For her, this wedding wasn't just about her son's happiness. It was a display of the Crawford family's power and name. As the music played softly, a woman entered quietly through the main door. Her name was Amara Johnson. She wore a simple, elegant dress not covered in jewels or expensive designs, but her calm grace made her stand out. She smiled warmly at the guests and moved toward her seat at the back. Most people didn't notice her, but one or two guests turned and whispered, surprised to see her there. Amara wasn't from a rich family. She had worked hard all her life, always believing in kindness and honesty. She had known Ethan and his bride, Lila, for some time. Years ago, when Ethan's business had almost failed, Amara had helped them quietly, never asking for anything in return. But that story was known only to the young couple, not to Margaret, who judged people only by appearance. When Margaret noticed Amara sitting among the guests, her smile slowly faded. She whispered to one of the planners, "Who is that woman? She doesn't look like she belongs here." The planner looked nervous and replied, "She was invited by Lila, ma'am." Margaret's eyes narrowed. Invited? To this wedding? Moments later, Margaret walked across the ballroom with the grace of someone used to being obeyed. The guests watched her move, curious about what she was going to do. She stopped right in front of Amara's seat and cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she said sharply, loud enough for others to hear. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Amara looked up, a little surprised but still calm. "Yes," she said kindly. "I was invited by Lila." Margaret forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I see. Well, I'm not sure how that happened. This event is very private. Maybe there's been some misunderstanding." The people around them grew silent. The music continued faintly, but everyone could feel the tension in the air. Amara didn't want to cause a scene. She stood up slowly and said in a gentle voice, "If my being here makes anyone uncomfortable, I'll leave. I don't want to disturb the celebration." Her words were full of grace, but they only made Margaret more uncomfortable, not because of anger, but because of pride. "Yes, I think that's best," Margaret said quickly. "We just have certain expectations here." From across the room, Lila saw everything. Her heart sank as she watched the woman who once helped her being treated this way. She started to walk toward them, but Ethan gently held her hand, whispering, "Let me handle it later." He didn't want a public scene, but his hesitation only made Lila more upset. Amara smiled softly, her eyes warm despite the embarrassment. She picked up her small clutch bag, nodded politely to Margaret, and began walking toward the door. The crowd made space for her, their eyes following her with mixed emotions. Some looked away, others whispered quietly. The air inside the hall grew heavy. Some guests felt bad but stayed silent. The orchestra continued playing, but the cheerful mood had disappeared. Margaret returned to her seat, trying to act as though nothing had happened. She whispered to a friend, "People need to understand there are places for everyone. Some just don't fit in with others." Her friend nodded weakly, clearly uncomfortable but too polite to disagree. Outside, Amara took a deep breath of the cool air. She looked back at the glowing ballroom through the glass doors. She could see the lights, the laughter, and the people pretending not to have seen what just happened. For a moment, she felt a pinch of pain in her heart, but she quickly brushed it aside. She had faced worse in her life. This was not the first time someone judged her before knowing who she really was. She stood by the gate for a while, thinking. Inside, Ethan finally gathered the courage to step away from his table. He whispered to Lila, "I'll go talk to her." But before he could move, Margaret stopped him. "Ethan," she said sharply, "this is your wedding day. Don't create drama. That woman doesn't matter." Lila turned to her future mother-in-law with tears in her eyes. "She does matter," she said softly, but Margaret ignored her. Ethan looked torn between his mother and his conscience. He stayed still, unsure what to do. Meanwhile, Amara smiled sadly and said to herself, "It's okay. Some lessons life teaches in silence." She opened her phone and made a short call. Her tone was calm but firm. "Yes, bring the cars around." Inside, the celebration continued, but something had changed. Guests whispered quietly among themselves, asking who the woman was. A few said she seemed too graceful to be just anyone. Others said maybe she was from an ordinary family. No one really knew. Margaret pretended not to notice the murmurs. She only focused on her pride, convinced she had done the right thing to protect the image of the Crawford name. But deep down, a few guests couldn't shake the image of that polite, calm woman walking away without anger or revenge. Only dignity. They didn't know that soon. The entire wedding would witness something they would never forget. As the music inside reached another high note, a distant sound began to echo from outside and the sound of engines approaching. Slow, deep, and powerful. Some guests turned their heads toward the entrance, curious. Even the security guards looked surprised as bright headlights appeared in the distance. Amara stood quietly by the entrance, watching as the first car stopped in front of her. One, then two, then more. All shining black luxury cars lined up in perfect order. Her calm smile returned, not out of pride but peace. Inside the hall, Margaret had no idea that the woman she had just dismissed so easily was about to change everything with her quiet strength and unexpected truth. The soft music inside the wedding hall slowly faded as people began whispering among themselves. Something strange was happening outside. The sound of several engines grew louder, echoing across the marble walls of the grand venue. Curious guests turned their heads toward the glass doors. The guard standing at the entrance looked surprised and nervous. Outside, Amara stood still, her calm figure outlined by the glow of the wedding lights. The first car stopped in front of her, and then another followed, and then more. A long line of black luxury cars, shiny Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, and a limousine, slowly entered the driveway. The sight was breathtaking. Every car looked spotless, polished, and expensive. The drivers stepped out together, all wearing black suits and white gloves. The guests inside pressed closer to the windows, trying to see what was going on. A few people even came out to the doorway. Margaret, Ethan's mother, frowned in confusion. "What's happening?" she asked the event planner. "Who's bringing cars like this to a wedding?" The planner looked just as shocked and could only shake his head. A few moments later, the main door opened and Amara walked back toward the entrance. But this time, something about her had completely changed. The soft, humble expression on her face was now calm and confident. The drivers greeted her respectfully. One of them opened the limousine door for her, but she smiled and said softly, "No, I'm fine. Please wait here." The guests began to whisper louder now. "Who is she?" one said. "She looks important." Another added, "I thought she was just a friend of the bride." The confusion spread quickly. Inside, Ethan and Lila looked at each other, their faces full of surprise. Ethan's heart started to beat faster. He suddenly remembered something his late father once told him, about a business partner named Amara Johnson, a woman who had helped save their company when they were almost bankrupt years ago. Could this be the same Amara? His hands grew cold as the realization slowly sank in. Margaret stood near the window, her face turning pale. For the first time that evening, she didn't know what to say. The woman she had just asked to leave was now standing outside, surrounded by a fleet of cars that even her rich family didn't own. Amara walked slowly back toward the entrance, every step graceful and composed. The guards at the door opened it for her immediately. When she entered, the room went silent. Even the orchestra stopped playing for a moment. Everyone's eyes followed her. Her simple dress now seemed royal under the chandelier lights. The same woman who had quietly left the room was now walking back with quiet confidence. Not to show off, but to show that dignity doesn't need loud words. One of her staff members approached her and said softly, "Madam Johnson, the team is ready." The word "madam" echoed through the hall. Margaret froze. Guests looked at each other in shock. Madam Johnson? The same name that appeared in magazines, business articles, and charity events. The name of one of the most respected businesswomen in the country. Margaret's lips trembled. Ethan and Lila hurried toward Amara. "Miss Amara," Ethan began nervously. I didn't realize." Amara raised a hand gently, stopping him from speaking. "It's all right," she said in her calm voice. "You don't have to explain anything, Ethan." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry for what happened. You've been nothing but kind to us. You helped us when we had nothing." Amara smiled warmly. "And I never regretted it. I was happy to see you both find love and success. But today was just a small reminder that sometimes people forget how easily pride can hide the truth." Her words weren't loud. but they carried weight. Everyone in the room could feel the meaning behind them. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Margaret took a step forward, her usual confidence gone. Her hands shook slightly as she spoke. I didn't know who you were, she said softly. If I had known, Amara looked at her kindly. That's the thing, Mrs. Crawford. You shouldn't have to know someone's name to treat them with respect. A murmur ran through the crowd. A few people lowered their heads in shame. Even the staff in the hall looked moved by her calmness. She had every right to be angry, yet she stood there without a trace of bitterness. One of Amara's assistants handed her a small, beautifully wrapped box. She turned to the couple and said, "This was meant to be my wedding gift. I hope it still can be." Lila opened it carefully, and inside lay a diamond bracelet that sparkled under the light, elegant, simple, and full of meaning. "May your marriage always remember that real wealth is not in gold or fame," Amara said softly. "It's in kindness and humility." Ethan and Lila both nodded with tears in their eyes. They hugged her gently, and even some guests wiped their eyes quietly. Margaret stood there, her pride melting into guilt. She looked around and saw how everyone admired Amara, not for her cars or her wealth, but for the way she carried herself. Calm, forgiving, and full of grace. Margaret took a small step forward. "I'm deeply sorry, Miss Johnson," she said quietly. "I misjudged you." Amara turned toward her. "We all make mistakes," she said. "But what matters is how we learn from them." Her words were simple, but they felt like a lesson everyone in the room needed. For the first time, Margaret didn't have a reply. She only bowed her head. The guests who had earlier whispered and judged Amara now felt ashamed of their silence. Some of them stepped forward to greet her respectfully. The music started again, but it felt different this time. Softer, calmer, as if even the sound respected her presence. Amara stayed only for a short while longer. She congratulated the couple once more, smiled politely at the guests, and then turned to leave. Her staff followed quietly behind her. As she stepped outside, the night air felt peaceful. She took one last look at the glowing hall, not with anger or pride, but with understanding. Her fleet of cars stood ready, their engines softly running. The chauffeurs bowed as she approached. She smiled gently and said, "Let's go." The cars moved slowly down the long driveway, one after another, their taillights shining like a trail of red stars. Inside the hall, everyone remained silent for a long time. Ethan put his arm around Lila, whispering, "We'll never forget this." Margaret sat quietly, lost in thought. She had spent years believing that class came from money and name, but that night, she realized it came from something far greater: respect, kindness, and grace. The night that began with pride ended with a lesson that would stay in every heart present, that true strength is not in wealth or power, but in how gently you carry your dignity when others try to take it away. The night air was calm as Amara's fleet of cars slowly disappeared down the long driveway, their polished bodies reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights. Inside the wedding hall, a quiet hum replaced the earlier whispers. Guests remained in their seats stunned, many with wide eyes and mouths slightly open. What had just happened was more than a surprising event. It was a lesson in humility and dignity that no one in the room would forget. Ethan Crawford stood near the center of the hall, his face still pale with shock. He looked at his mother, Margaret, who sat frozen, hands folded nervously in her lap. For the first time that evening, the proud woman looked small and uncertain. "Mom," Ethan said quietly, "do you understand now?" Margaret shook her head slowly, her eyes avoiding his. She had always thought her judgment and pride were her strength, but tonight she realized they had caused harm to someone who did not deserve it. Lila, the bride, wiped her tears silently. She had known Amara for years and had always admired her kindness and intelligence. Seeing her treated so unfairly had been painful. But seeing Amara return with calm strength and quiet power had been inspiring. Lila turned to Ethan and said, "We can't let this moment just pass. People need to know that true respect comes from the heart, not status." Ethan nodded. He felt a mix of shame, gratitude, and awe. Guests began to discuss what had happened, softly at first, then louder. "Did you see her cars?" one whispered. "She must be someone very important." Another added, "It's not the cars. It's the way she carried herself. She didn't yell or cause a scene. She was calm, graceful, Slowly, admiration replaced curiosity and judgment. The lesson of humility and dignity spread quietly through the room, touching each person in a different way. Margaret finally stood, her hands trembling slightly. She walked toward the stage, and the chatter in the hall died down. I want to apologize," she said, her voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. "I misjudged a guest. I allowed my pride to guide my actions, and it caused pain to someone who never deserved it. I hope one day I can learn to carry myself with the same grace I saw tonight." No one expected Margaret's words, and yet they carried weight. Ethan's face softened, and Lila stepped closer to her mother-in-law, offering support without speaking. Even the guests, many of whom had been shocked or uncomfortable, now nodded quietly. This was a moment of growth, not just for Margaret, but for everyone present. Meanwhile, Amara outside was preparing to leave. She had spent a few quiet moments reflecting by her cars, watching the glowing lights of the wedding hall fade slightly in the distance. She had no desire to embarrass anyone or to show off her wealth. Her intention had always been simple: to remind people that dignity, patience, and respect are stronger than pride, judgment, or appearances. Her staff quietly opened the doors to the limousines and other cars, and she stepped inside with her usual calm. The engine started, a gentle hum that contrasted with the quiet storm she had just navigated inside the hall. As they drove away, she glanced at the distant hall one last time. She thought about the young couple and hoped that her presence had reminded them that true strength comes from kindness and forgiveness, not money or status. Back inside, the wedding slowly resumed, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Guests spoke more quietly, smiled more genuinely, and paid attention to each other in ways they had not before. Even the music seemed softer and warmer, a reflection of the lesson they had all just witnessed. Ethan and Lila returned to their celebration, but Ethan could not stop thinking about Amara's words. True respect comes from the heart, not from titles or appearances. Margaret remained in her seat for a long time, thinking about her behavior. For years, she had believed that wealth and social position were the most important things in life, but tonight she saw a truth she could no longer ignore. A person's character, their patience, and their kindness define them far more than status ever could. She resolved silently that she would try to change, to approach life with more humility, and to think twice before judging someone she did not truly know. In the following days, stories about the incident spread quietly among the social circles. People were amazed not just by the luxury of Amara's cars or the surprise of her arrival, but by the way she had carried herself. No one had seen anger or resentment. She had simply reminded everyone of a truth that was often forgotten. Strength and grace are more powerful than wealth, pride, or judgment. Ethan and Lila often reflected on that night together. They realized that weddings, while a celebration of love, could also serve as moments of deep learning. They told their friends, "The woman who seemed ordinary at first became the most extraordinary presence at our wedding." They spoke of Amara not only as a guest, but as a teacher, someone who had reminded them, and everyone present, that life is measured by character and compassion, not appearances. Margaret slowly began to practice humility in her daily life. She reached out to others she might have judged too quickly, tried to listen before speaking, and learned to treat people with the respect they deserved. Though it was not always easy, she remembered the quiet power of Amara's presence and the lesson she had taught without raising her voice. Even months later, the story of the wedding was remembered by those who attended, not because of the gowns, the food, or the decorations, but because of a woman who quietly stood for dignity, respect, and grace. She had shown everyone that no amount of pride or social status could replace the power of humility and understanding. For Amara, the experience was another confirmation of her belief in kindness. She never sought attention, yet her actions that night spoke louder than words could. She reminded everyone, quietly but firmly, that one should never judge others before knowing them. Her calm, elegant exit, surrounded by the fleet of cars, left a lasting impression, a story of strength, patience, and grace that would be remembered for years. The wedding ended and life went on, but the lesson remained. Guests, the young couple, and even Margaret would carry that memory as a reminder. True power lies not in wealth, titles, or appearances, but in how you treat others when no one expects you to. And in that quiet, powerful way, Amara had changed the hearts of everyone present, leaving them with a story they would never forget. A story not of scandal or shame, but of courage, dignity, and the quiet strength that comes from a kind and noble heart.